You ever deal with an HOA? Yeah? Those three letters are enough to make most homeowners groan. HOAs, or Homeowners Associations, were supposed to protect property values and keep neighborhoods organized. But honestly, in reality, most HOAs just turn into miniature dictatorships run by people who have way too much free time and way too little self-awareness. Now, mix that with a Karen. You know the type. Entitled, Always Right. Rules for thee, not for me. And suddenly, you've got the perfect recipe for chaos. And that's exactly what happened to me. This is the story of how the HOA's queen Karen decided that my garage was somehow her personal parking spot. And how I, without yelling, without fighting, gave her a week-long lesson she'll never forget. So grab your coffee, settle in. Because this one gets juicy. Asterisk, asterisk, I live in one of those neighborhoods where all the houses look the same. You know, the ones cookie cutter, nice lawns, clean driveways, two-car garages, and of course, the ever-present HOA breathing down your neck. Now, when I first moved in, I didn't mind. My neighbors seemed decent enough, and the HOA board wasn't too overbearing. Sure, they'd send the occasional letter if your trash bins were visible for too long, or if your grass was half an inch too tall. Annoying, but manageable. That was until Karen moved in. Now, to paint the picture, Karen was in her late 40s. Platinum blonde, bob cut, giant sunglasses that she wore even on cloudy days. And she always had this permanent expression of disapproval, like the world owed her something, and everyone else was failing to deliver. Oh, and of course, she was on the HOA board within a month of moving in. Naturally, at first, she kept her antics small, complaining about people's flower choices, demanding that holiday decorations be uniform. She even once suggested that everyone should paint their garage doors the same shade of beige because the variety was too distracting. But then, she crossed into my territory. Literally, it was a Friday evening. I had just finished work, pulled into my driveway, and what do I see? Her shiny silver Lexus parked in my garage. Not my driveway, not the curb. Inside my garage, I sat there in my car, stunned. I mean, how do you even react to that? I didn't even know she had the code to my garage. At least, not until I remembered I'd given it to a contractor a few months earlier for some repair work. And guess who was on the HOA board that coordinated with contractors? Yeah, Karen, so apparently she'd helped herself. I knocked on her door. She opened it with that smug smirk like she'd been expecting me. "Oh, hi," she said, as if nothing was wrong. "I just needed a place to park for the weekend. You've got the bigger garage, and I assumed you wouldn't mind." Wouldn't mind? I was speechless. Who does that? I managed to say, "Actually, I do mind. That's my garage. You need to move your car." Her smile dropped instantly. "Well, I'll move it when I can. I'm busy right now." HOA members are allowed certain privileges, you know? She closed the door before I could respond. Privileges. What the? Asterisk, asterisk. I could have gone nuclear right then. Towed the car. Called the cops. Reported her to the HOA president. But something in me snapped that night. I was tired of being pushed around by this HOA nonsense. And I was really tired of Karen acting like she owned the whole neighborhood. So I decided I wasn't going to confront her again. I was going to let her trap herself. And that's when the idea hit me. See, my garage has an old but solid manual lock on the inside. It's not used much anymore since most people rely on garage openers. But the lock still works just fine. And once it's shut, you can't open it from the outside. So I thought to myself, all right, Karen, you want to park in my garage. Fine. But let's see how you enjoy it when your precious Lexus is trapped. And that's exactly what I did that night. After she went inside, I quietly went into my garage, slid the lock shut, and walked away with the key in my pocket. Then I did something even better. I packed a bag and left. Asterisk, asterisk now. I didn't just disappear randomly. I had a work trip lined up for Monday anyway. So I figured, why not extend it? I booked a little cabin out by the lake, turned my phone notifications off, and for the next 7 days, I vanished. Meanwhile, back home, Karen was in for a surprise. Of course, I wasn't there to witness it firsthand. But oh, the stories I heard when I got back. Absolute gold. Apparently, Saturday morning, Karen strutted out to her garage, my garage, to take her Lexus for a spin. Except, she couldn't open the door. She tried the keypad. She tried the button. Nothing. She called a garage repair service. But they told her they couldn't legally break into someone else's property without the homeowner's permission. She called the HOA president, who told her flat out, "That's not your garage, Karen." And she lost her mind. By Sunday, she was fuming. She left notes on my front door. She called my phone repeatedly. She even complained at an emergency HOA meeting that I was illegally detaining her vehicle. But here's the kicker: since she had trespassed into my garage without permission, technically, I was in the right. She couldn't even report me without admitting she was the one who broke in first. For 7 glorious days, her car sat there, untouched, unreachable, trapped like a rat in a cage, and me. I was sipping coffee by the lake, reading a book, completely stress-free. When I came back home the following Friday, the first thing I noticed was the mob of HOA members standing on my lawn. Karen was red in the face, screaming about legal action. The president was rubbing his temples. Neighbors were peeking from their porches like it was a reality TV show. I walked right up, calm as can be, jingled my garage keys, and said, "Oh, sorry everyone. I was out of town. Didn't realize anyone had parked in my garage. Let me unlock that." And just like that, Ty popped it open. Her Lexus rolled out. Covered in a fine layer of dust, the battery practically dead. And the look on her face. Priceless. But trust me, that was just the beginning, because after that week, Karen wasn't about to let it go, and me. Oh, I had just gotten started. Asterisk, asterisk, the day I unlocked the garage and set Karen's Lexus free. You could practically feel the tension in the air. Neighbors were peeking through blinds, kids were whispering, and Karen was boiling over. The second the car rolled out, she stormed up to me, finger jabbing the air like she was conducting an invisible orchestra. "You had no right to do that," she screamed. "Do you know the inconvenience you've caused me? I had appointments. I had errands. You trapped my car illegally." Now, I could have argued. I could have pulled out every piece of logic and legal reasoning. But instead, I just smiled and shrugged. "Oh, my bad," I said. "Didn't realize anyone would be parking in my garage without asking. Maybe next time just don't." That line hit her like a slap. She sputtered, turned bright red, and stormed off toward her house while everyone else chuckled under their breath. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be the end of it. That she'd swallow her pride, learn a little humility, and leave me alone. But Karen, learn a lesson. Not in this lifetime. The very next morning, I woke up to find a bright orange violation notice taped to my door. According to the HOA, my garage usage was improper and in violation of neighborhood cooperative rules. Improper garage usage. Let that sink in. Apparently, because I didn't allow community access to my garage, I was breaking the rules. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. This wasn't an HOA policy. I knew the bylaws front to back. This was 100% Karen's handiwork, so I did what any sane person would do. I marched straight to the HOA president's house. Now, to be clear, our president wasn't a bad guy. His name was Mark, mid-50s, retired military, no-nonsense attitude. He didn't love drama, but he also hated conflict, which meant people like Karen tended to walk all over him. I knocked on his door, showed him the violation notice, and said, "Hey, Mark, explain this to me." He sighed, rubbed his forehead, and muttered, "Karen, apparently. She'd been pestering him nonstop since the garage incident. She'd convinced herself that HOA members had the right to temporary use of other residents' garages if circumstances demanded it. Circumstances demanded it, I asked. She just didn't want to park on the street. Mark shrugged. Look, I don't agree with her, but she's been raising hell at every meeting. I'm trying to keep the peace. That's when I realized something important. This wasn't just about me anymore. Karen wasn't satisfied until she was controlling the entire neighborhood, and if nobody else was willing to stop her, I was. Over the next week, Karen went on the offensive. She filed 3 more violation notices against me, 1 for improper lawn edging, 1 for unauthorized exterior lighting because I'd changed a porch bulb, and 1 for unsightly objects visible from the street because my trash bins were out for garbage day. All bogus, every single one. But here's where things got interesting. Karen didn't realize that I kept records. Every notice, every text, every voicemail documented. And when I reviewed the HOA bylaws again, I found something beautiful. Board members were not allowed to file repeated personal complaints against a single household without a formal vote. In other words, Karen was abusing her position, and I had the receipts. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the houses, I spotted Karen outside, watering her flowers, though really, it looked more like she was just glaring at everyone who walked by. I strolled over, calm as can be. "Evening, Karen," I said. "By the way, I've been keeping all your violation notices. I think they're going to look real nice in a complaint I'm filing against you with the HOA board." Her face went pale. She tightened her grip on the watering can. You can't do that. I'm on the board." "Exactly," I said. "Which means you should probably be following the rules better than anyone else. But hey, if you'd like, we can discuss it at the next meeting." Then I walked away, leaving her standing there like a frozen garden statue. But I wasn't done. If Karen wanted to play games, I'd play better. She wanted to weaponize the HOA. Fine. I'd use the HOA against her. The next week, I showed up at the monthly board meeting with a folder in hand. Neighbors filled the folding chairs, murmuring about rumors they'd heard. Karen was already seated at the table, smug as ever. When it was my turn to speak, I laid it all out: the unauthorized garage use, the violation notices, the harassment. I even played a voicemail where Karen left me a message saying, "You'll regret messing with me. I have HOA authority." The room went silent. You could hear the ceiling fan squeak as it turned. Mark cleared his throat. "Karen, is this true?" She stammered, denied, twisted her words, but the evidence was overwhelming. Finally, another board member chimed in. "This is abuse of power. We can't ignore it." By the end of the meeting, the board voted to formally censure her. She lost her ability to file individual violation notices, and she was warned that any further misuse of authority could result in her removal. I left that meeting feeling like I'd just won the Super Bowl. But if you think Karen took that lying down, oh no, the very next day, I found fresh tire tracks across my lawn. Deep, muddy ruts that cut through my grass like scars. And guess whose car I saw speeding away? That shiny silver Lexus. She was done hiding behind HOA rules. Now she was getting personal. I stood there on my porch, looking at the damage, and I realized something. This wasn't just about a garage anymore. This was war. And in war, you don't just defend. You strike back. The first thing I did was install cameras. Not little doorbell ones, real, high definition, motion-activated cameras that covered my driveway, lawn, and garage. If Karen wanted to escalate, fine. But I was going to catch her red-handed, and wouldn't you know it? Within 2 nights, I had footage of her sneaking across my yard, tossing a soda can into my bushes. Petty, childish, but damning nonetheless. I didn't confront her, not yet. I let her keep digging her hole because I had a much bigger plan in mind. See? What Karen didn't realize was that most of the neighborhood had started turning against her. My little garage stunt had become legendary. People whispered about it at barbecues, laughed about it at block parties. Karen was the butt of every joke, and when I exposed her at the HOA meeting, that sealed it. So I started talking to my neighbors. Casually at first, then more directly. Everyone had a Karen story. She'd yelled at one family for leaving a kiddie pool out too long. She'd scolded another for having too many lawn gnomes. She even tried to fine a sweet elderly couple for excessive bird feeders. By the time I was done, I had a small army of neighbors ready to rally against her, and together we were going to end Karen's reign once and for all. But before we made our move, something happened that turned the whole situation on its head. One night, around 11 p.m., I heard a loud bang outside. I rushed to my window and saw Karen's Lexus, or rather, what was left of it. She had miscalculated, backing out of her driveway and slammed it right into her own mailbox. Hard. The bumper was hanging off. The mailbox post snapped in half. I couldn't help it. I laughed so hard I nearly fell over, and that's when it hit me. Maybe I didn't need to destroy Karen. Maybe Karen would destroy herself, but still, I wasn't taking any chances, because if I knew one thing for certain, it was this: Karen wasn't finished with me yet, and the real storm, it was still coming. Asterisk, asterisk, after the mailbox crash, Karen vanished for a few days. No Lexus parked out front. No angry pacing around her yard. No violation notices mysteriously taped to people's doors. It was almost eerie. Like the villain in a movie retreating into the shadows to plot her comeback. But I wasn't about to get comfortable. Karen wasn't the type to lick her wounds quietly. She was the type to come back bigger, louder, and twice as unreasonable. Sure enough, to return the next weekend, she came back swinging. The first sign was a glossy flyer stuffed into every mailbox in the neighborhood. In bold letters across the top, it read, "A new era of HOA leadership. Vote for Karen as president." I nearly choked on my coffee when I read it. She wasn't just content being a board member anymore. She wanted to run the entire HOA and her campaign. Oh, it was a masterpiece of manipulation. She promised stricter rule enforcement to preserve property values. She claimed she'd streamline neighborhood improvements. She even had the audacity to say she wanted to bring unity to the community. Unity from Karen, the same woman who had turned the whole neighborhood into her personal kingdom of nitpicking and fines. It was laughable, but also dangerous, because if Karen actually won that election, my little garage stunt would look like child's play compared to the chaos she'd unleash with full power. That's when I knew it was time to put my alliance plan into motion. Remember how? It's been quietly gathering Karen horror stories from neighbors. Well, I wasn't going to keep them to myself anymore. I went door to door, talking to families, retirees, even the younger couples who usually kept to themselves. And the stories poured out like water from a broken faucet. One neighbor told me how Karen demanded they take down their inflatable Santa Claus 2 days after Christmas because it was disrespectful to the HOA timeline. Another said she once yelled at their teenager for parking his old pickup truck on the street. Overnight, by the time I was done, I had a literal binder full of complaints. a Karen dossier, and my pitch to the neighbors was simple. If she wins, this becomes our reality full time. But if we work together, we can stop her. At first, people were hesitant. Some were scared of retaliation. Others thought maybe it wasn't worth the drama. But then I pulled out the crown jewel of my evidence. The video of her sneaking into my garage that first night to park her Lexus. The gasps I heard when I played that footage on my laptop were priceless. Suddenly, everyone understood. This wasn't just about annoying rules or petty fines. This was about abuse of power, and once the ball got rolling, momentum built fast. We formed an informal group, half-jokingly. We called ourselves the Anti-Karen Coalition. We agreed to spread the word quietly, attend the election meeting en masse, and most importantly, expose Karen's track record for everyone to see. Meanwhile, Karen was doubling down on her campaign. She started hosting little meet and greets in her driveway, complete with cheap wine and store-brand cookies. She'd stand there in her big sunglasses, telling anyone who would listen that the neighborhood had gone downhill. And only she had the strength to restore order. It might have worked on a few people who didn't know the full story. But every time she thought she was gaining ground, one of us would show up afterward and, let's just say, gently provide the real version of events. It was like a spy movie. Except instead of secret agents, it was a bunch of suburban homeowners armed with gossip, screenshots, and righteous indignation. Finally, election day arrived. The community center was packed. Folding chairs filled the room. Neighbors squeezed shoulder to shoulder. And the atmosphere buzzed like a courtroom before a high-profile trial. Karen strutted in wearing a blazer that looked one size too tight and carrying a stack of note cards. She had that smug look like she'd already won. Mark, the current president, called the meeting to order. He looked tired, like a man who just wanted to retire from this nonsense and go fishing. The speeches began. A few residents made small announcements about neighborhood events. Then it was time for the big one. The election for HOA president. Karen stood up first. Her speech was, well, exactly what you'd expect. Fellow homeowners, we deserve better leadership. We need someone who will enforce the rules fairly, keep our property values high, and make our community a place we can be proud of. I have the dedication, the experience, and the vision to take us there. Applause trickled through the room, mostly from the handful of people too polite to know what she was really about. Then it was my turn. Now, I hadn't planned on running for president. Honestly, the last thing I wanted was to be stuck managing petty complaints about lawn gnomes. But I knew someone had to stand up to her. And when the coalition nominated me as a candidate, I couldn't say no. So I walked to the front of the room, cleared my throat, and said, "Neighbors, I think we all know what this election is really about. It's not about keeping grass trimmed or mailboxes painted. It's about whether we want to live in a community built on respect or fear." You could feel the energy shift. People leaned in. I pulled out my folder and started laying out the evidence. The violation notices, the harassment, the recordings, and finally, the video of her parking in my garage without permission. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, even a few outright boos aimed at Karen. She tried to shout over me, calling it fake and taken out of context, but it was too late. The truth was out. When the vote came, the results weren't even close. Karen got 6 votes. I got 38. I hadn't just stopped her from becoming president. I'd beaten her outright. Now, here's the twist. I didn't actually want the job, so, after the vote, I announced, "Thank you for your trust. But I believe leadership should be shared." I propose that we rotate responsibilities among board members, so no one person has too much power. The room erupted in applause. People loved it, and Karen. She sat there, fuming silently, her dreams of HOA domination crumbling right before her eyes. But you think that was the end? Oh no, because a cornered Karen is the most dangerous kind of Karen. Later that week, I got a letter in the mail. Not from the HOA, not from a neighbor, but from a lawyer. Karen was suing me to her claim. Emotional distress and unlawful imprisonment of personal property. In other words, she was trying to sue me for locking her car in my garage for 7 days. It was ridiculous. It was laughable. But it was also real, and suddenly, this petty neighborhood feud had just turned into a full-blown legal battle. Asterisk, asterisk, when I opened that letter from Karen's lawyer. I had to sit down. Not because I was scared, though, let's be honest. The words "you are hereby being sued" will jolt anyone's nervous system, but because I was laughing too hard to stand. The claim was absurd. Emotional distress. Unlawful imprisonment of personal property. She'd parked in my garage without permission. The audacity was mind-boggling. Still, a lawsuit is a lawsuit. Whether it's nonsense or not, you can't just ignore it. So, I did the responsible thing. I called a lawyer of my own. Now, my lawyer, Mr. Davis, was an older guy. White hair, calm voice. The kind of man who looked like he'd seen every ridiculous legal stunt in the book. When I handed him the papers, he skimmed them, then leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "She really thinks she's got something here," he said. I shrugged. "She really thinks she owns the neighborhood." "So yeah, she thinks she's got something," he chuckled. Then pointed to the clause in the HOA bylaws about unauthorized entry into private property. "Don't worry. This isn't going anywhere. If anything, you could countersue." That put me at ease. But still, the idea of dragging this nonsense into court was exhausting. I figured Karen would get bored or realize how hopeless her case was and drop it. Spoiler alert. She did in single quotes 2 weeks later. I found myself sitting in a small claims courtroom, surrounded by neighbors who had shown up out of pure curiosity. Word had spread like wildfire. To them, this was free entertainment. Like the climax of a Netflix drama series they'd been binge-watching. All summer, and there she was, Karen, sitting at the plaintiff's table in a blazer she probably bought just for the occasion, flipping through her notes like she was preparing to take down a Fortune 500 company. When the judge walked in and the proceedings began, Karen launched into her speech. "Your Honor," she said dramatically, "this man maliciously locked my vehicle in his garage for 7 days. I was unable to attend appointments, unable to use my personal property, and I suffered severe emotional distress. He abused his power as a homeowner to target me, and I demand justice." She even dabbed her eyes with a tissue, as if she'd been sobbing for weeks over the trauma of not being able to drive her Lexus. I swear, if the judge had rolled his eyes any harder, they would have gotten stuck when it was my turn. I stood up and kept it simple. "Your Honor, she parked her car in my garage without permission. I didn't invite her. I didn't give her the code. She broke in and helped herself. When I realized it, I locked my own property and went out of town. If anyone's rights were violated, it was mine." Then I pulled out the footage. The video of Karen slipping into my garage late at night, smug as ever. The room buzzed. Even the bailiff tilted his head to get a better look. Karen tried to interrupt, sputtering about editing and context, but the judge silenced her with a hand. "Mrs. Sanders," he said, "this video very clearly shows you entering his garage without authorization. That's trespassing. Do you deny this?" She stammered, tried to spin it, but the judge wasn't buying it. When the dust settled, the verdict was swift. Case dismissed. Not only that, but the judge actually warned her that filing frivolous lawsuits could result in penalties. He even suggested that if I wanted, I could file a countersuit for harassment. Karen's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. She stormed out of the courtroom without even looking at me. I thought that would be the end of it. After all, losing in court should have been a wake-up call. But Karen? She doesn't wake up. She doubles down. The weeks that followed were interesting. On the surface, things looked calm. No more violation notices, no more flyers, no more lawsuits. But underneath, I could tell Karen was stewing. She avoided eye contact when I saw her outside. She didn't wave at neighbors. It was like she was living in her own little bubble of rage. And then came the anonymous letters. They started showing up in my mailbox, typed, unsigned, filled with veiled threats. You should move before things get worse. People are tired of your drama. You don't belong in this neighborhood. It was obvious who they were from. The phrasing, the entitlement. The sheer pettiness screamed Karen. I kept every single one, filed them away neatly, just like all the other evidence, because I had a feeling this wasn't over. One night, I was sitting on my porch when my neighbor Tom wandered over with a beer in hand. "You know she's not going to stop, right?" he said. "Yeah, I know," I sighed. Tom grinned. "Then maybe it's time we stop playing defense." That got me thinking. Up until now, I'd been reacting. Blocking her moves, countering her attacks, putting out her fires. But what if, instead of waiting for her next stunt, I went on the offensive? What if we didn't just stop Karen, but removed her entirely? So the Anti-Karen Coalition met again. This time in my garage, the very same one that had started it all. We laid out the plan. According to the HOA bylaws, if enough homeowners signed a petition, we could call a special vote to remove a board member and not just censure them. Remove them completely. All we needed was a majority, so we got to work. We went door to door, explaining the situation, showing people the evidence, reminding them of all the times Karen had made their lives miserable. Some people were hesitant at first, but once they heard the full story, especially the lawsuit they were in, within a week, we had the signatures. More than enough. And when we turned that petition in to Mark, his face lit up like Christmas morning. Finally, he said, "I've been waiting for this day." The special vote was scheduled for the following month. Word spread fast. You could feel the anticipation buzzing in the neighborhood. It wasn't just about an HOA vote anymore. It was about sending a message. Karen, of course, caught wind of it. She went into overdrive. She started knocking on doors, trying to plead her case. She baked cookies for people, handed out little pamphlets about her vision for the community, even offered to waive minor violations if they supported her. But it was too late. People were done with her. The night of the vote, the room was packed again. More neighbors showed up than I'd ever seen before. It was standing room only. Karen tried to give a speech, painting herself as the victim of a smear campaign. But you could see it in people's faces. They weren't buying it. When the votes were counted, the result was overwhelming. Karen was officially removed from the HOA board. The room erupted in cheers. People hugged, clapped, even popped open cans of soda like it was New Year's Eve. And me. I just leaned back in my chair, satisfied it had taken months of nonsense, drama, and petty battles. But finally, the neighborhood was free. Or at least, that's what I thought. Because Karen. She wasn't done yet. The very next day, her house went up for sale. And as much as we all celebrated, deep down, I knew. Wherever she ended up next, some other neighborhood was about to learn exactly what it meant to deal with a Karen. But my story with her, it wasn't quite finished. Because before she left, she had one last trick up her sleeve. When I saw the for sale sign go up in Karen's front yard, I felt a wave of relief I hadn't felt in months. It was like the neighborhood had collectively exhaled after holding its breath for far too long. People were smiling more. Kids were riding their bikes again without Karen, yelling at them for being too loud, and the HOA meetings suddenly became, dare I say, it-pleasant. Felt like we had finally won. But of course, Karen wasn't the type to leave quietly. She couldn't just pack up, move away, and let go. No, Karen needed a grand finale. One last act of pettiness to remind everyone she was still the self-proclaimed queen of the cull-d-sack, and, as always, she didn't disappoint. It started with the rumors. A neighbor spotted her late one night, loading boxes into her Lexus. Another said she was burning papers in a fire pit out back, muttering to herself. One kid swore they saw her sneaking around people's mailboxes at dawn. At first, I brushed it off. Classic Karen paranoia. Probably just her being dramatic on her way out. But then I woke up one morning to find my front lawn completely trashed. Eggshells splattered across the driveway. Toilet paper hanging from the trees. A bag of garbage dumped by my mailbox, and right in the middle of the mess, a handwritten note, scrawled in all caps. Hope you enjoyed your little victory. This isn't over. I'll be honest, I was furious. My first instinct was to march right over there and confront her. But I stopped myself, because here's the thing about Karen. Confrontation is her fuel. That's what she wanted, a scene, an audience. Another excuse to play the victim. So instead, I smiled to myself, grabbed my phone, and checked the footage from my cameras. And there it was, crystal clear. High-definition video of Karen at 2:13 a.m. lugging a trash bag across my lawn, hurling eggs like a disgruntled Easter bunny, and giggling to herself like a kid pulling a prank game. Over the next HOA meeting happened to be that same week. Karen showed up. Of course, she was still technically a homeowner until her house sold. She strutted in, acting like nothing had happened, sipping from her oversized tumbler like she was above it all. When the floor opened for community concerns, I raised my hand. Actually, I said, I do have something I'd like to share. I hooked my laptop up to the projector, clicked play, and let the footage roll. There was silence at first, then gasps, then laughter. Neighbors watched as Karen stumbled across my lawn. Toilet paper dangling from her hands, eggs exploding against my garage door. It was like watching a bad comedy sketch. When the video ended, I turned to her and said, Karen, would you like to explain yourself? Her face turned beet red. She stammered, denied, said it wasn't her. Claimed the footage was doctored, but the evidence was undeniable. Mark, the HOA president, cleared his throat. Karen, considering your recent removal from the board, and now this, I think it's best you quietly move on. Before the police get involved, the room erupted in murmurs and chuckles. Karen grabbed her tumbler, muttered something about pathetic neighbors, and stormed out. That was the last HOA meeting she ever attended. But of course, she had to get in one final jab, the day before her moving trucks arrived. I woke up to find something odd in my garage. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I stepped inside, looked around, and froze. Sitting right there, dead center, was a giant cardboard cutout of Karen, life-size, sunglasses and all, with a speech bubble taped to it that read, I'll be back. I actually burst out laughing. I couldn't help it. Of all the petty, bizarre things she could have done, leaving behind a cardboard effigy of herself was peak Karen. I wheeled it out to the curb for trash pickup, neighbors pointing and laughing as they drove by. It became an instant neighborhood meme. Someone even printed t-shirts that said, Remember the garage, Karen, with a little cartoon of a locked door. By the time the moving trucks rolled out, she was officially a legend. A cautionary tale. The kind of story you tell new homeowners over drinks at the block party. And yet, as funny as it was, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't really gone. Because people like Karen, they don't just disappear. They relocate. They reset. And then they start the whole cycle all over again somewhere else. Sure enough, a few months later, I got a message from a buddy of mine who lived across town. "Hey, didn't you have some crazy neighbor named Karen? Because I think she just moved into my neighborhood. And you won't believe this, she's already trying to change the mailbox colors." I laughed so hard. I nearly spilled my drink. Poor guy. Now it was his turn to deal with her. But as for me, life went back to normal, peaceful, quiet. The neighborhood healed, friendships grew stronger, and the HOA shockingly started to function like it was supposed to. Every once in a while, someone would bring up the story of the garage, or the lawsuit, or the cardboard cutout. And we'd all laugh about it like it was folklore, because in a way, that's what it had become. A neighborhood legend. The tale of the time a Karen tried to take over, and got locked out instead, of course. Not every story ends with a neat little bow, because just when I thought I'd seen the last of her, I got a letter in the mail, not from Karen, but from the new owners of her old house. Apparently, when they moved in, they found something hidden in the attic. A box, and inside that box, a stack of old HOA documents, personal notes, and a binder labeled in big, bold letters. Neighborhood Control Plan. Asterisk when the new owners of Karen's old house knocked on my door holding that dusty binder. I thought they were just being polite neighbors, maybe wanting to introduce themselves. Maybe asking about garbage pickup day instead. The husband handed me the box and said, "Hey, we found this in the attic. Thought you should see it. Looks like it's got your name written all over it." I raised an eyebrow. Opened the lid, and there it was, a thick 3-ring binder. Front cover labeled in bold block letters, Neighborhood Control Plan. I actually laughed at first. It sounded like the kind of notebook a middle school kid might use for a bad soap opera. But as I flipped through the pages, my smile faded. Because Karen wasn't joking around. This was a playbook. A literal manual for how she intended to seize control of the neighborhood. The first section was titled, Strategies. She had lists of people's names, with notes about their weaknesses. Tom, lazy, hates mowing lawn. Target him with lawn violations until he caves. The bakers, too many decorations, easy to find. Will cause drama if pushed. Ope thinks he's clever. Watch him. Don't let him get upper hand. Yes, she had an entire section just for me. My name was underlined, with arrows pointing to phrases like likely troublemaker and dangerous if underestimated. Another section was labeled HOA reform ideas. But they weren't reforms, they were power grabs. She had drafted fake bylaw changes to give the board expanded authority over people's personal property. She even had a page about mandatory uniform landscaping, complete with clippings of beige paint swatches taped inside. It was insane, like something out of a dystopian novel. But with lawns and mailboxes instead of governments and armies. The more I read, the more unsettled I became. This wasn't just petty control. This was obsession. Karen hadn't just wanted influence. She wanted domination at the back of the binder. There was even a calendar with milestones she had planned. Month 1, secure HOA board seat. Month 3, propose mailbox uniformity. Month 6, eliminate decorative clutter gnomes, bird feeders, etc. Month 12, run for president. Month 18, expand HOA authority to garage usage. Some had check marks. Some had angry red X's. She'd been tracking her campaign like it was a military operation, and here's the kicker stuff I hadn't even known about. Apparently, she'd tried to push a proposal at one point to ban bicycles being left on driveways. Another one about limiting how many cars a family could park in front of their house. Thankfully, those had been shot down before they ever reached a vote. But the fact she was even planning it. Terrifying. When I looked up, the new owners were staring at me. Wide-eyed. Was she really that bad? The wife asked. I let out a long sigh. Worse, you have no idea. You dodged a bullet moving in after she left." They laughed nervously, then said, "Well, we didn't want to keep it in the house. Bad vibes, you know?" I couldn't blame them. That binder felt cursed, like holding on to it might summon Karen back from whatever suburb she was haunting now. So I thanked them, set it on my counter, and tried to forget about it. But of course, the neighborhood found out. Word spread fast that Karen had left behind a control plan. Suddenly, people were showing up at my house, asking if they could see it at first. I said no, I didn't want to feed the gossip mill any more than necessary. But eventually, I caved. We ended up hosting a little reading night in my garage, of all places. A dozen neighbors huddled around while I flipped through pages, reading Karen's insane notes out loud. The laughter was nonstop. Every time I read another ridiculous rule idea, people were falling out of their chairs. But underneath the laughter, there was also unease, because if she had gotten her way, if we hadn't stood up to her, half of those rules could have become real, and that realization hit hard after that night. The binder became kind of a neighborhood relic. We called it the Karen Chronicles. People joked about putting it in a glass case like a museum artifact. But the truth is, it also became a lesson. The HOA started revising its bylaws not to expand power, but to prevent abuse. They added clauses about checks and balances, transparency, and limits on how many violations a single board member could file. It was like Karen's madness had forced the community to grow stronger, to make sure no one like her could ever rise again. And for a while, things were peaceful. Almost too peaceful. Then one evening, I got a call from my buddy, the one across town, who'd told me Karen had moved into his neighborhood. "Man," he said, half laughing, half groaning, "you'll never believe this. She's already at it again, trying to change the fence colors, complaining about kids leaving chalk drawings on the sidewalk. She's calling emergency HOA meetings like it's her full-time job." I felt a chill run down my spine, because suddenly, that binder didn't feel like a relic anymore. It felt like a blueprint. If she'd tried all this here, she'd try it there. And who knew? Maybe she'd even refined her tactics, learned from her mistakes. I thought about warning them, sending him copies of the binder, arming his neighborhood with evidence of what was coming. But part of me hesitated, because if there's one thing, I learned about Karen, it's this: the more you feed her drama, the more power she gets. Still, I couldn't shake the image of her standing in someone else's driveway, waving that same smug finger in the air, declaring herself the queen of yet another cul-de-sac. One night, as I was sitting in my living room flipping through the binder again, I noticed something I hadn't seen before: a tucked-away pocket in the back cover. Inside, it was a folded piece of paper, yellowed and crinkled. When I unfolded it, my jaw dropped. It wasn't just more neighborhood notes. It was an address, not mine. Not this neighborhood, another one, written in bold letters across the top. Phase 2, ****. When I unfolded that yellowed paper and saw the words Phase 2 staring back at me, I felt an instant jolt in my gut. An address, a different neighborhood entirely, written in Karen's sharp, almost angry handwriting. I sat there in silence, staring at it, trying to piece together what it meant. Was this where she had planned to move if things fell apart here? Was it part of her grand plan to control multiple neighborhoods, like some twisted HOA empire? The thought alone was enough to make me laugh nervously. But knowing Karen, it didn't feel like a joke. It felt deliberate. The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I typed the address into Google Maps. It was a gated community about 15 minutes away. Bigger houses, stricter HOA, everything Karen would salivate over. I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head. "Of course," I muttered. She was already planning her next conquest before she even lost this one. Part of me wanted to drive over there immediately, knock on doors, and warn them about the hurricane they'd just inherited. But another part of me thought, what if she's already there? Later that week, my buddy, the one suffering through Karen 2.0 in his neighborhood, called again. "Man, it's getting worse," he groaned. "She's already filed 6 complaints in 3 weeks. 6 against everyone. She even came after me because I left my garbage can out an extra hour." I chuckled. "Yeah, that sounds about right." Then he said something that made my blood run cold. She mentioned something about another place. Said this was just her practice round, like she's preparing for the real deal. I froze. Top practice round. Phase 2. It all lined up. That night, I pulled the binder back out, flipped through the pages again, and started looking for patterns. Sure enough, there were subtle hints I'd overlooked. Notes scribbled in margins like test idea. You're perfect for phase 2. Pages marked with sticky tabs. Labeled refine later. She wasn't just making random power moves, she was running trials, experimenting. Our neighborhood. We hadn't been her endgame. We'd been her prototype, I'll admit. That thought kept me awake for days, because Karen wasn't just some nosy neighbor anymore. She wasn't just petty, she was strategic, and that made her dangerous. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to see phase 2 with my own eyes. On a Saturday afternoon, I drove out to that gated community. The guard at the entrance asked my business, and I lied, saying I was visiting a friend. He waved me through without much trouble as I drove down the pristine streets lined with perfectly manicured lawns. I couldn't help but feel a weird tension. It was too clean, too perfect, like the kind of place Karen would drool over. I half expected to see her Lexus parked in a driveway, and then there it was, not her car, but a moving truck, parked outside a corner lot. The kind of house that screamed, "I'm going to run the block." I slowed down as I passed, trying not to look obvious. A woman stood outside, barking orders at the movers. Blonde bob haircut, sunglasses, tumbler in hand. Karen, no mistaking it. I actually laughed out loud in my car. Unbelievable. She's already here. I drove around the block twice more, just to confirm. And sure enough, every time I passed, she was out there, directing traffic like she owned the place. Phase 2 wasn't just a plan anymore. It was happening now. Here's where things got tricky. Do I warn the neighbors? Hand out copies of the binder like some kind of neighborhood prophet? Or do I sit back, let them figure it out the hard way, and hope they band together like we did? Because here's the truth. Dealing with Karen is exhausting. And most people don't believe how bad it can get until they live it themselves. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that if I didn't say something, I'd be partly responsible for whatever chaos she unleashed there. That night, I made a decision. I typed up an anonymous letter. Nothing dramatic, just a warning to the residents of neighborhood name. You may soon find yourselves dealing with a new homeowner who has a history of exploiting HOA rules for personal control. Be cautious. Do not underestimate her. Look out for each other. I didn't sign my name. I didn't include details that could trace back to me. Just a heads up slipped into a handful of mailboxes on my way back through the neighborhood. It felt like the right thing to do. But here's the kicker. The very next week, I got something in my own mailbox. No return address. Just a plain envelope with my name scrawled across it. Inside was a single piece of paper. No words. No threats, just a photocopy of Karen's binder cover, neighborhood control plan, and in red Sharpie across the front. Phase 3. Asterisk when I pulled that photocopy out of the envelope and saw the words Phase 3 scrawled across it in red Sharpie, my stomach dropped. This wasn't just Karen being petty anymore. This was personal, because whoever slipped that into my mailbox had to know where I lived. which meant Karen hadn't moved on. She was still watching me. For a long minute, I just sat at my kitchen table, staring at the page. My first thought was, she knows I went to phase 2. It was too much of a coincidence. I'd driven out there, snooped around, dropped those anonymous letters, and then, a week later, this shows up at my house. Karen had sniffed me out, and if I knew one thing about her, it was this. She hated being challenged. That night, I barely slept. Every little sound outside had me on edge. A car door slamming. A dog barking. The wind rattling the fence. My mind kept replaying the idea that Karen might be lurking out there, watching, waiting for her chance to strike back. Because with Karen, retaliation wasn't a maybe, was inevitable. Sure enough, the games began. First, it was small stuff. My trash cans mysteriously knocked over every pickup day. Packages left at my door disappearing before I could grab them. Random phone calls in the middle of the night where no one spoke, just breathing. I knew it was her. It had her fingerprints all over it, subtle enough to avoid proof, but irritating enough to wear me down. But I wasn't about to let her win. Not this time, so I got smart. I upgraded my security cameras, set up motion-activated floodlights, even bought one of those video doorbells that records everything in wide angle. If Karen wanted to play phase 3, I'd be ready. And sure enough, within a week, I caught her, not on my lawn this time, but close. There she was, late at night, walking her dog, except she wasn't holding a leash. She was creeping past my driveway, stopping to stare directly into my camera like she knew I'd be watching. Then she smirked, turned, and walked away. I replayed that clip at least a dozen times. That smug little grin burned into my brain. It wasn't about the HOA anymore. It wasn't about the neighborhood. This was Karen versus me. The next HOA meeting rolled around, and for the first time since she'd moved out, Karen actually showed up. She wasn't a resident anymore, but she waltzed into the clubhouse like she still owned the place, sipping from her ever-present tumbler. People looked at her in shock, whispering. Some laughed nervously, but I knew why she was there. She wanted to rattle me, and it worked at least a little. Because when she took the floor, she didn't even try to hide it. "I may not live here anymore," she said, her voice dripping with smugness, "but I still care deeply about this community." And I think it's important to remember that certain individuals, her eyes locked on mine, will do anything to stir up chaos just to get attention. The room went quiet. All eyes shifted to me. I clenched my fists under the table but kept my mouth shut. Because the thing about Karen, if you bite, she wins. Afterward, a few neighbors came up to me, confused. Why is she even here? Can she do that? Technically, no. But technically, yes. HOA bylaws are murky. If you're invited as a guest, you can sit in. I knew she'd found a loophole. She always did. The next day, another letter showed up in my mailbox. The next day, another letter showed up in my mailbox. This one was handwritten. You think you're clever? But I'm always 10 steps ahead. Phase 3 has already begun. Enjoy the show. No signature, of course. But the handwriting was unmistakable. Karen's for the next few weeks. It was like living in a thriller movie. Every time I left the house, I felt eyes on me. My cameras caught glimpses of her Lexus cruising slowly down the street. Neighbors mentioned seeing her visiting friends nearby, though nobody seemed to know who those friends actually were. It was psychological warfare, and honestly, it was working. I was jumpy, paranoid, always waiting for the next strike. But then something unexpected happened. One evening, Mark, the HOA president, knocked on my door. "Hey," he said, lowering his voice. "We need to talk." About Karen. I invited him in. and he set a folder on my counter. Inside were copies of multiple complaints Karen had filed after she moved out, noise violations, lawn complaints, even a formal accusation that I was operating a commercial business out of my garage. None of it was true. None of it stuck. But she was still filing them. Mark shook his head. She's not even a homeowner here anymore. She shouldn't have standing. But she's persistent. I sighed. Phase 3, he raised an eyebrow. Phase what? So I told him everything. About the binder, Phase 2, the creepy letters, the smirk on my camera. By the end, his jaw was practically on the floor. She's obsessed with you, he said finally. This isn't about the HOA anymore. It's personal. I nodded. Yeah, I know. That night, as I sat in my garage, the same garage she once tried to commandeer, realized something. Karen wasn't going to stop. Not until she got what she wanted. And the problem was, I had no idea what that actually was. Control? Revenge? To see me crack under pressure? Whatever it was. One thing was clear. Phase 3 had only just begun. Asterisk, asterisk, when I thought about Karen's so-called Phase 3. I figured it would be more of the same letters. Late-night drive-bys, maybe another cardboard cutout stunt, but then things escalated. Fast, it started one Saturday morning. I opened my front door to grab the paper and froze, because sitting on my porch was a box. Not from Amazon. Not from Ops. Just a plain brown cardboard box. No label, no markings. At first, I thought it might be a prank from some kids. But when I bent down and opened it, my stomach turned. Inside were pieces of my own mail. Torn up, scattered, mixed with shredded HOA newsletters, and, in the center, a photo of me taken from my driveway. Someone had been watching, and I didn't even need to guess who. I showed the footage from my doorbell camera to Mark. The HOA president, sure enough, at 3:27 a.m. There she was, Karen. Hood up, sunglasses on. Crouching as she slid the box onto my porch, Mark shook his head. She's lost it. This is harassment. I agreed. But the problem was, she was clever. Always just careful enough to keep things in a gray area. A box of paper and a photo. Creepy. Yes. Illegal. Harder to prove, it was Karen's specialty. But then she made her first real mistake. A few days later, I was working in my garage when I heard voices outside. I peeked through the blinds and saw Karen in the middle of the street, arguing with one of the newer neighbors, apparently. She'd tried to tell them their car wasn't HOA compliant. They laughed in her face and told her to leave. Her response. She shouted, "You'll regret siding with him," jerking her thumb toward my house. And just like that, she revealed what I already suspected. Phase 3 wasn't about the neighborhood. It wasn't about rules. It was about me after that. The harassment intensified. Strange cars parked near my house at odd hours. Spam deliveries arriving at my door, 10 pizzas one night, all unpaid for. Flyers shoved into my mailbox, accusing me of running a drug operation out of my garage. She wanted to isolate me, turn people against me, wear me down until I broke. And for a moment, I almost did, but then something unexpected happened. Instead of believing her nonsense, the neighbors rallied around me. The guy she yelled at in the street came by with a six-pack and said, "Don't sweat it, man." We've all seen her games. The family down the block offered to keep an eye on my place whenever they were home. Even Mark called an emergency HOA session not to discipline me, but to formally ban Karen from attending meetings or filing complaints for the first time. It felt like I wasn't fighting this battle alone, but Karen. She didn't back down. She doubled down one night. My cameras caught her again, this time sneaking onto my driveway. With a can of spray paint, I bolted outside before she could finish. She froze like a deer in headlights. The word liar half scribbled across my garage door. I pulled out my phone and hit record. "Karen," I said calmly, "what are you doing on my property?" Her face twisted into that familiar sneer. "Exposing you? Exposing me for what?" She didn't answer. She just dropped the can, stormed off, and muttered, "Phase 3 is bigger than you think." The next day, I went to the police with the footage. Finally, they took it seriously. Vandalism, trespassing, harassment had her dead to rights. But when they went to question her, they came back shaking their heads. She's lawyered up. Claims you've been stalking her. Says she has proof. Proof? That made no sense until I got another letter in the mail. This one wasn't taunting. It was eerie. Inside was a stack of printed photos. All of them were of me at the grocery store, at the gas station, sitting on my porch reading. Karen had been following me, documenting me, building some twisted case in her warped little mind. That's when it hit me. Phase 3 wasn't just harassment. It was escalation. Karen wasn't trying to win the neighborhood anymore. She was trying to destroy me, personally. And if she'd already sunk this low, who knew how far she'd go? I knew I had two choices. Keep reacting. Let her control the narrative. Or take the fight to her end. Phase 3, before it spiraled completely out of control, and after staring at those creepy photos for a long, long night, I made my choice. Asterisk. I knew I couldn't let Karen keep running her Phase 3 unchecked. She'd crossed too many lines. My property, my reputation, my peace of mind. So instead of waiting for her next stunt, I decided it was time to flip the script. First, I gathered everything: the spray paint footage, the mailbox photos, the late-night drive-bys, the creepy box of shredded mail, even the stack of photos she'd taken of me. It wasn't just harassment anymore, was obsession. An obsession leaves a trail. I organized it all into a neat little folder. Evidence, hard proof. The kind of thing no lawyer could spin away. But I wasn't done yet. Next, I reached out to Mark, the HOA president. "Listen," I said, "Karen's made this personal. But she's still using the HOA as her weapon. If we show the community everything she's been doing, we can shut her down for good." Mark nodded grimly. "About time. Let's end this." So we called a special meeting. Mandatory attendance. Everyone in the neighborhood invited. And when the day came, the clubhouse was packed. Karen showed up, of course. She strutted in late, tumbler in hand, smirk plastered across her face like she'd already won. "Really?" she scoffed. "Another meeting about me? You people are obsessed." Oh, the irony. I stood at the front of the room, folder in hand, heart pounding. "Actually, Karen," I said, "this meeting isn't about you. It's about the truth." And then, one by one, I laid it all out: the videos, the photos, the letters. Each piece of evidence projected on the screen for everyone to see. The room gasped. Murmurs spread. People shook their heads in disbelief as the picture became clear. Karen wasn't a crusader for the community. She was a stalker. A saboteur. Karen tried to object. "Fake. All of it. He's framing me." She shrieked, pointing at me, but the evidence was overwhelming. The footage didn't lie. The timestamps lined up. Even her handwriting betrayed her. Finally, Mark stood and said what everyone was thinking. "Karen, you're banned. Effective immediately. From our meetings, from filing complaints, from stepping foot on this property. If you violate this, we'll pursue legal action." The room erupted in applause, and for the first time, I saw something I never thought I'd see on Karen's face. Fear. She stormed out, muttering about lawsuits and conspiracies, but it was over. The neighbors had seen the truth. The HOA had taken a stand. Phase 3 was dead before it could fully bloom in the weeks that followed. The difference was night and day. No more late-night calls. No more creepy letters. No more drive-bys.Karen was gone. For real this time, neighbors started joking again, calling my garage Fort Knox and nicknaming the binder the Book of Karen. The tension that had gripped our street for so long finally melted away. Life went back to normal, but here's the thing about people like Karen. You never really forget them. Sometimes, I'll be sitting in my garage, sipping a drink, and I'll remember the time I locked her car inside for a week, or the ridiculous cardboard cutout she left behind, or the binder full of schemes. And I'll wonder, where is she now? Because I know Karen didn't stop. She just moved on. Somewhere out there in some other neighborhood. Someone else is living through their own version of Phase 2. Maybe they're discovering pizza deliveries they didn't order. Maybe they're finding angry notes in their mailbox. Maybe they're sitting in a clubhouse right now, trying to convince their neighbors that the HOA queen isn't what she seems. And maybe, just maybe, they'll hear about my story. The tale of the time Karen parked in my garage, and how it all spiraled from there. As for me, I learned a lot about standing my ground, about not letting pettiness rule my life, about the importance of neighbors who've got your back. Most of all, I learned that when you deal with someone like Karen, you don't play by their rules. You write your own, and sometimes that's the only way to win. So if you ever find yourself facing your own HOA, Karen, remember my advice. Lock the door, stand tall, and don't let her drag you into her drama, because in the end, people like that don't win. They just vanish. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. See you in the next one. Peace out.